Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, 18-hour special initiative that celebrates the undying entrepreneurial spirit of micro, small and medium enterprises. On the show today, we're talking about the opportunities and challenges which exist for family-run businesses in India. I have with me three experts in the studio. I have Ashwin Parekh, he's the managing partner of Ashwin Parekh Advisory Services. I have Dr. Anil Menon, faculty at the SP Jain School of Management, and Rahul Agarwal of Burukal Logistics. Thank you very much, the three of you gentlemen, for being with us here tonight. Let me kick this off by doing a SWOT analysis, if I may, of family-run business, and probably start by talking about the challenges, because we get a lot of feedback from our viewers in terms of what they think are some of the challenges that exist right now for businesses in general, but specifically for businesses that are family-owned and family-run. Maybe I can start by talking to you, Mr.
No, sure. I mean, there are several challenges at a small organization. I mean, to start with, you have to really line up your credit in terms of the material that you buy. You've got to really approach the banking system to ensure, that the credit keeps on flowing at the time when you need it the most. And the most difficult one is when you are a small business, you are always dependent on either large corporates who pick up your material, if you are in any value addition kind of unless of course you are a mom and pop shop or whatever, where you're dealing with the customers directly. But we're talking about anyone who's doing any value addition, he has to rely on a larger entity to whom he supplies the material. By and large, my practice experience tells me that that's one of the biggest challenges. When the economy is going good, most of these small businesses, family-run businesses, tend to overtrade. Tend to go into so many opportunities all at the same time, because there is a boom, and everybody seems to be talking about, there's optimism in the air and more business. Then they overtrade, and that's the time when the financial management goes completely out of hand. That's the biggest challenge. The second biggest challenge is governance. Governance has always been, with the family businesses, very large. The transparency that is very essential, between the working and the owner, is something, the executive and the owner, and in most cases the executive is the owner. It does become very difficult, really. So a good order of governance. And the last, proper, reliable financial statements. Without that, the lenders find it extremely difficult to really work with them. So three main challenges as I see them.
Okay. Let me come to you and talk to you. You, of course, are in a family-run business.
That's right.
You and your brother decided to, go out and set up your own company, and you work with your brother. You mentioned it's been about 16 years since the two of you have been together. So maybe I can ask you, when you started out, what are some of the challenges that you faced, and what advice can you give our viewers based on your experience?
Well, one of the major challenges was the the financial part, which has already been covered. The other thing is when you start up afresh, getting good skilled manpower is always a challenge, because you're new and you're going out in the market and getting people to work with you. Now that's where the disconnect happens. The second part also is the vision that a family run entrepreneur will be limited to a couple of years, whereas when you look at the bigger corporates, they will have a 5-year, 10-year plan in place, so they exactly know what to do. Most of the family run organizations are running on a day-to-day basis. They tend to even change with the situations, whereas a bigger organization will work on their vision irrespective of the market conditions. So these are some of the issues that we face. Also when multiple family members are working together, like in our case we are two brothers, so the succession planning, the way the things need to be divided amongst the family members, and how one of the family members should not feel less important. These also play a lot of important these are factors which can affect your business in so many ways.
So is family run not something that can be also then professionally managed? Because one of the things that I've heard from both of you are that, say for example, business plans which are not maybe perhaps laid in stone. Is it possible? And I know we've discussed this in the past as well. What would you have to say to that?
I think we need to get to the definition of professionals. A professional is somebody who keeps in mind the interests of the organization. So when you say can an FMB be professionalized, a family managed business be professionalized, the answer is yes. The only problem that happens, and that's with my experience with family managed businesses, is it typically becomes a single owner control, or maybe as the esteemed colleague just mentioned, between two brothers. What they need to also understand is, for business continuity, they need to get good professionals who might be better than them in certain skills. So typically what FMBs do is they get yes men into their entire managers who are entirely dependent on them, and then the problem starts. So yes, professionalization is important, but then it's also about pampering to one's ego. So that is where I believe a lot of family managed businesses, which has grown beyond the micro scale and gone to the medium. In fact, the largest private sector company in our country today is a family managed business. Yes, they can be professionalized, provided the owner actually takes the proper professionals and lets them take the key decisions.
Okay, I wanted to comment on what he said in terms of bringing this professional on, and also Dr. Menon was talking about the pitfalls of bringing in a professional who could turn out to just be a a yes man, afraid to really stick his or her neck out and take some hard calls.
Sure.
In your experience, what is what would your advice be?
Well, actually, in real life situation, it could work both ways. If you really get some very good people, then there is always a risk. I mean, the risk to the extent that if he understands the business, he understands all the nuances of the business, there's a good risk that he may walk away with a certain part of the business or the business itself, for that matter. How much do you let go, is one thing that you have to really comprehend or analyze quite closely. Keeping all aspects of the business under control is the next important thing. You may let go, but the final controls is something which I suppose, that's true not just for a family-owned business, for any professional business as well, a professionally run business also. There's always some kind of a leadership, and the leadership has to create policy framework, and the rest of the organization is to work within that framework, basically. So it's that part which becomes very critical. Some do it, many don't, so that's where the challenge lies, I suppose. Absolutely.
All right, gentlemen, do hold that thought. Let's take a very quick break, but we'll continue talking about what's some of the things that you should keep in mind if you're a family-run MSME destitute. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and we're talking about the challenges and opportunities which exist for family-run businesses in India. I want to pick up on some of the points that have been discussed so far. And one of the things, of course, is the kind of regulatory environment that all companies face in India. And let's talk specifically about family-run businesses. And Dr. Menon, I'd probably like to ask you to comment on whether there exist any specific rules or a particular framework that exists specifically for family-run businesses. And if there isn't, would you argue that there should be?
There is no separate guidelines or regulatory framework for family managed business. It's the same Companies Act, it's the same IT Act. Should there be one? The answer is, of course, there should be one for family governance, right? But having said that, I think this has to be more of internally driven rather than talking about an external regulatory environment. I think what family managed businesses should do is they should think about succession. It's a very well quoted study that hardly 1/3 of family managed businesses survive beyond the third generation. The quote is that first generation starts, second generation builds, the third generation destroys. And this is true for where it's an American business, if it's true for an Italian business. We have also gone across and talked to some people. So the key to regulation or governance is that you should have a proper succession planning in place, possibly have different business models for different times. And what about the role of women in businesses? So traditionally what has been said is, ladies are not allowed to come into business. Now what is the saying, and this is with the recent Supreme Court judgment, that a daughter has equal rights in the family's wealth. I think what needs to be also done is look at the role of the daughters in the business, may not be as managers, but definitely as owners.
Okay, sure.
No, I would quickly react to, one of course is that, and taking from, what was said, regulations and entrepreneurship necessarily do not go together, I suppose. In order to really have good entrepreneurship and in fact make entrepreneurs come out with their ideas, you can't bind them within regulations. So that's the first quick reaction I would like to make. There's something interesting about self-regulation and regulation. And I'll introduce that as a subject for entrepreneurs of small size. See, you're not regulated by any framework. There is no separate act, as we just said. But there can be self-regulation. In the sense, you have to really decide, how much can you step aside of being an owner, and see whether something is good for the business, as we rightly said earlier also. What is good for the business, to begin with? And can you step aside, keep yourself outside in a position where you're reviewing rather than you're deciding all the while, I see, and this is something peculiar I saw when I've been in practice for 36 years now. When I look at people, I've practiced outside of India as well. People in the UK where I've worked a lot, people can step aside. An entrepreneur can step aside, start reviewing till he reaches a point where he will say, look, I'm not in a position to do any value addition any longer. I've created this value. I'll let my people continue with it. I'll take my share. And I'll make sure that this business grows. Indians somehow the other, and that's where the third generation comes in. I suppose some of the global families also have started realizing that there is this need for, creating some kind of a self-regulation, your self-regulatory environment under which roles are very clearly distinguished. Ownership and management, unless it's very clearly distinguished, who's doing what, you may have this kind of a situation,
One thing I'd like for you.
I'd like to add one point here, is that when he mentioned about, the first generation, builds and the second generation takes it forward, the third destroys. I have a view on that. Is in most of these succession stories where there are 3 or 4 generations involved, you rarely, especially in India, you don't come across too many situations where the father asks his son, look, I have this business, but is it really what you want to do, or would you like to do something else? Yeah, so what happens is he's been thrust upon that same business and said, you have to carry forward this because this is what I have built. So how much passion does the next generation have to actually run that same business in the same manner in which the father ran it is the question. Because if you break up the the way to do business, or the the passion which that generation had to do the business, or the risk-taking ability that they had, or the technology that they were using then, and then the financial angle. If you break up, and if you see what was it in 2 generations back and what it is today, you will see that the percentages of these factors have changed drastically. The passions have relatively come down, but the risk-taking abilities have gone up. So if my father or my grandfather was running the same business that I'm doing today, he would take a much lesser risk, but he would have more passion. And he would want to control every step of the way that the business is running. He would look at his profitability on a daily basis, and I think that's what has really changed today. Today the younger generation is more tech savvy. They want to bring in more new ideas. New ideas will also mean a need to take more risk, because you're experimenting with that idea. Whether some of them work, and they work very well. We've seen a lot of small ideas grow into very big industries, but some of the ideas don't work, and that is not the practice that the earlier generations had. So one of the reasons why a good business can go bad in the current times is, one is that the earlier generation is still regulating the way it should be run, or wanting it to be run the way they did it, and they are not able to change with the times. And the next generation or the third generation is then not so passionate about it because it's being thrust down on him.
Rahul, another thing that I want you to comment on is finances and raising of money. A lot of the MSMEs who write into us or call us say that banks are concerned that we're a family-run business and are refusing to lend us money. One, is that a perception problem? And two, if that is actually happening on the ground, your advice in terms of how to overcome that and why this problem that MSMEs are facing.
See, I think he had answered this question right at the beginning, that the balance sheets or the financial paperwork is not so good by the family-run organizations. Like we don't really get into the depths of the balance sheet. We have the family Khandani CA who's been running things the way the previous generation used to do, because it was run on its own money. The seed capital that the forefathers had put in is still running. Now I, as a new generation entrepreneur, would like to grow it substantially or exponentially, and I need more money. So I go to the bank. The first thing the bank will say is that, look, your balance sheet is not good enough to lend. And we need to then get back. And this happened with us when we started in '97, and we went to a government sector bank, and he said, I can't fund you on this, but because you've come through so and so, I will fund you a little bit. And that's how the government sector was then. Today you have the private banks who have much bigger appetite for risk taking, and they do lend to the family organizations. But the most important thing is that we need to be disciplined ourselves internally, and which has been, I think, the points which both my esteemed colleagues have said right from the beginning of this discussion, that if the financial planning is good, if the financial the paperwork is healthy, there should be no reason why the banks will not lend you. So in a way, the banks are trying to push the family-run organizations to get more organized, which is a need of the hour.
Sure.
One more thing the banks also would like to look at is the teamwork. Typically what the bankers also feel is, is that it's an individual. What if something happens to an individual, which is where along with financial planning, good numbers, I think the team will make a lot of difference.
Thank you. I just want to take that point forward. You were talking about planning, Rahul, and I want to talk about succession planning and also estate planning. Are the two separate in your opinion? And
Very
do you
true.
see them?
They're very different. You see, the estate planning will come in when it is agreed by the entrepreneur that he needs to leave behind for his successors in their personal capacity, not in the business. I mean, succession planning on the other end is how well the business is going to run after that person steps aside. I mean, these are two different things. Estate planning now in the Indian context has not been so robust. People have not paid enough attention to estate planning at all, to be very honest. You get so passionate with your business, you get so stuck up with your assets that your ability really to then say that these assets will go to, or I'll do something else to make sure that my wealth is passed on, my assets or my business is passed on to the next generation. I don't think it's done in a very organized way in India at all yet. So, I mean, we will come across that as we grow. But estate planning is one of the things which is still missing in the families. The very fact that, I mean, as my colleague said, a person is 70 years old, he still wants to go to business. He's not even thought about his succession or his estate planning at all, because he just wants to be there all the while. So that's a bigger challenge in the Indian context, I thought.
Sure. Do you agree with that view?
See, partially yes, because I mean, while they are two different subjects, but when it comes to an actual family succession, or in other words, sometimes a separation or even a distribution of assets, then the succession and the estates would tend to go hand in hand, because it will be both the part of the overall process. But one thing is definitely sure is that the family-run entrepreneurs or the family-run family houses need to actually plan their estates properly, in terms of the paperwork, in terms of what is the right assets to have, and if it has to go down to the next generation, how am I using it today, or how am I putting it to the best use today, that the next generation can enjoy the fruits of it. Sure. That tends to be a big lacking in a lot of the family businesses, because as he rightly said, we are so busy and engrossed in just running the show that we tend to leave out a lot of things. And apart from this, governance is a major factor, which or self-regulation for that matter. We need to bring in some disciplines which are in line with what best practices the big organizations are following, and they are doing a lot of good things today, so we need to follow that.
Okay. Let me get quick closing comments, in fact, from each of you, and maybe I can start with you, Dr. Menon. What lessons can Indian entrepreneurs, Indian family-run businesses learn from their global peers?
One, financial planning, having a vision. I've seen a lot of companies run without budgets. So one, have financial planning. Second, don't invest time only in firefighting. Typically, business owners in India, and it's good to a certain extent, get into day-to-day activity which can be delegated. Third, succession planning, which is very, very important. Many of them don't even have a will. Now that's something very surprising. I think in the Indian context, typically we believe death is something unpleasant. Okay, or maybe business owners think they last till perpetuity. I don't know what's the case, but there's no will. Understand that it's not about retirement planning. I think the other way to define retirement is disarmament planning. So you've done your part in the business. Now what you could possibly do is do the activities you decide to do. Keep the business assets separate, and that's where I think the role of trusts can really help a lot. Fourth, trust other professionals, maybe your next generation also, and then ensure that you just pave the path. Last but not the least, don't only talk about something negative all the time, because that puts up the second generation. So mention the positives so that the induction of this next generation becomes very critical.
Sure. I want a quick comment from you. This is something that we haven't discussed so far, and that's managing interpersonal relationships. When the same people that you see at work are the people that you see back home, how do you ensure that there's a distinction between the professional and the personal?
See, you primarily divide the role of work. That is the most important factor, because when you're overlapping activities, that's when the friction comes in. And if you are able to clearly segregate your activities and leave the rest to trust, then I don't see that there should be any issue in terms of working with your family members in the same organization.
Okay.
The things go bad when you tend to overlap or try to step over somebody else's role of operation.
Okay. Mr. Parak, I want to ask you top advice that you would have for our viewers who are possibly family-run businesses in terms of what they should keep in mind.
Well, I thought there was something that I've been always toying with whenever I work with medium-sized or small-sized, let's say, entrepreneurs. One is the kind of benchmarks which are available for a large corporate organization to look at the value addition or the economic value addition or the business value addition, let's say. Those benchmarks somehow are missing in the small businesses. I mean, in case of large corporate, it starts with ratings. Now because of the banking system, you're supposed to get yourself rated. If you really get your honest rating and look at the value addition to your rating or to your performance, the benchmarks must be used on a regular. Without the benchmarks, passion alone, cannot really give you an answer in terms of what kind of value addition either the family members have done collectively or individually. It's very important to recognize the roles on one side and to reward that role. There has to be proper benchmarking. And that's missing in the businesses basically.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being with us here tonight and running us through your views in terms of the opportunities and challenges for family-run MSMEs. Do remember that if you have any queries for us, you can always write in to us at leadersoftomorrow@times-group.com. You can reach us on social media using the hashtag LOT or call us on that number which is on your screen. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.